The Abolition of Man, Part 3, by Andy and Fred. So, as a quick recap, the thesis of C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man was that if we debunk and abolish traditional moral values, and we gain control over the conscience of man, it will result in the eventual abolition of man. So now knowing this, we can look at each of the sections before Part 3 and break it down a bit further. So Lewis proposed that there was something called the Tao. It ruled over everything. It was what we got our moral truths, even our religious morals, from. It was our sole source of value judgments. From it, we could say if things were good or bad. So unlike our own beliefs, the Tao can't be changed. If we do change it, then quite simply, it's not the Tao. Everything, again, is right or wrong under the Tao, and that there aren't varying degrees of right or wrong. Lewis then saw that there was an English book that he referred to as the Green Book. Under the Green Book, everything was subjective, so a scenario would be right in X but wrong in Y. It had different degrees. The other problematic thing of the Green Book was that it taught that all statements that have value are reflections of the emotional state of the speaker and are therefore unimportant. So what the Tao does is that it trains people to react to an object, and we can say it's right or wrong. So we can say we like it or we don't like it, depending. What the Green Book does is it makes everything non-rational, so it forces us to get rid of our sentiments as a result, so we can try to see the object in question.
In Part 2, The Way, Lewis basically attempts to destroy all potential justification for any other philosophy besides the Tao. The three that he primarily targets are utilitarianism, progressivism, and instinct-based ethics. His understanding of all of these was that they fall short of the Tao, and the Tao is superior to all others because all other forms of moral understanding and religious understanding are eventually derived from and traced back to the Tao. All other forms of moral understanding result in circular reasoning, where they fail to intrinsically recognize objective right and objective wrong. They have some subjective, underlying, untangible reason as to why they believe what they believe.
In Part 3 of The Abolition of Man, Lewis says that power is neutral. It's neither good nor evil. The problem is that it's man that uses it for good, or oppositely for evil. Now, people have said that as man has evolved, he's gained power over nature. Lewis strikes that all down by saying that in reality, man's power has stayed the same over time. It is actually man's powers over others that has increased, not man's power over nature. And he gave the example that if I have something you want, my power over you increases, and we see that in our everyday life. So, if this pattern continues, then we can, or rather he theorized that there will be a point where a generation will wield all of man's power over the rest of humanity for all of time. Because there is no more power for the next generation to have or to learn, so that way they can be a little bit better. So man will stay at a flat line just like this for the rest of humanity until the world ends. Lewis gave the example of contraceptives. By using contraceptives, it allows us to wield power over a generation that doesn't even exist yet. So we can, in theory, selectively breed, so that way we can have the next generation of people that we would prefer. So we can shape the next generation how we want with the pill. As Lewis said, what we call man's power over nature turns out to be power exercised by some men over other men with nature as their instrument. Nature as their instrument was his reference to the contraceptive. So after that, we can then shape how this next generation thinks through education. This is progressivism. So instead of teaching the generations through the Tao, teaching that this is right by giving someone something that they need and this is wrong in accounts of murdering or anything like that, Instead of doing that, we condition the generations to give back to society what we have supposedly given them. So Lewis says that for the power of man to make himself what he pleases means, as we have seen, the power of men to make over other men what they please. So the people who are teaching this next generation on how they should give back are what Lewis calls the conditioners. The conditioners make their own values as opposed to taking it from the Tao, which is a serious problem, because the Tao is what has ruled under everything under the old arching way of life. Under the conditioners, there is a sort of idea of a new generation. So they can't pull from the Tao because that isn't even from the new generation. So as a result, they hold their personal values and whatever they believe higher than the Tao. Lewis says that this is neither good for humans or bad for humans simply because they are not humans. By doing that, by not using the Tao and conditioning through time, they have created something that in themselves are not human, where there is no right or wrong. As Lewis says, if you will not obey the Tao or else commit suicide, obedience to impulse, and therefore in the long run to mere nature, is the only course left open.